astrocartography, and Edgar Casey on astrology, and couples counseling using the Davison method. And he's also very much into mundane astrology and mundane astrology research, which is the topic of his talk today. He's the author of Inner Journey Cosmic Sojourns, volumes 1 and 2, which synthesizes soul lessons, karma, life between lives, and the Edgar Casey philosophy. And you can reach him on Earth. You can reach him at
On Earth.
Yeah, on Earth. Yeah. At www.transpersonal.us and at stephen.poplin.com. So with that, I won't quite let let Stephen take it away just yet, but just to first of all, welcome everybody to Asheville Friends of Astrology. We meet monthly, we meet virtually, and if you want to sign up for our email notifications, go to our website. Just Google Asheville Friends of Astrology, and it's the WordPress website, and there is a button on the homepage that says subscribe, and when you do that, you automatically subscribe to our emails. And we're also on Meetup, and so that's how you can find us. I am not sure what we are doing for April. And Ronnie is not here to tell us, but as of now, I think we are skipping April. But if I send out a notice otherwise, you will know that is not the case. But otherwise, I think we're resuming in May, and I am not remembering who our May speaker is, but we'll let you know. Okay, so with that,
because Mercury's retrograde, we're going to skip April.
uh,
It's going to be retrograde for 3 weeks, and then it's shadow for 3. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think that's probably a good idea, unless you want to bring someone back that has like a new vision, then that would work.
yeah. Okay, well that's probably a reason. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen, and we'll all enjoy the show. And one other thing, please mute yourselves, and also I think it helps to turn off the video that uses less bandwidth. Okay, go to it, Stephen.
Okay, good, thanks. And it's nice to see some friendly faces here, and they're now disappearing. Yeah. So yes, I've been interested, of course, in mundane astrology for many, many decades. In fact, this particular alignment of the Saturn Neptune, I was aware of that in the mid 1980s, because it was coming up the end of the 1980s. And I was thinking, okay, from what I've seen at that point, probably the United States is going to be really in for a big shakeup. But I was so looking at or focusing upon the United States that I failed to look over towards the Soviet Union, which of course fell, during that really interesting alignment. And that certainly changed history. So I'm going to share screen here now. Got a program. And I hope everyone can see this. Interesting part about that is that now everything else has disappeared. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, we're seeing it. It's
you
good.
can?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, good. So the communist alignment of 2026, and the big picture here is that uh, when Saturn and Neptune come together, since it's pretty much inception back in 1846, and when I say that, Neptune was discovered in 1846, and coincidentally, it was right there next to Saturn in the sign of Aquarius. And I thought, well, that is a really interesting coincidence, wondering, since I believe that we are in the age of Aquarius, and I believe that that started with the discovery of the ruler of Aquarius, which was Uranus, and that was in 1781. And I think it was like 65 years after that, that then Neptune was discovered, and lo and behold, it was in the sign of Aquarius. And so I'm thinking that particular alignment of Saturn and Neptune in Aquarius may have something to do with breakthroughs in the development of our modern world, of how we are interacting, how we are progressing, let's say, in life. So approximately every 34, 36 years, Saturn Neptune will conjoin. And you see here on the screen, starting in 1846, and I'll take a look at a couple of interesting things that happened at that point. And then the next conjunction, and by the way, I'm also going to be taking a look at some squares and some oppositions, but there's so many that one can get bogged down in all of that. But the big conjunctions, that's where there's a bit of a reset happening, and the interesting coincidences occurring at those times really have a lot to say. Well, you can now see this too. Introducing the players. Saturn, the organizing timekeeper. Saturn has the will to implement, achieve, organize, and thus change. And Saturn, a friend to us all. I find also that my studies with Edgar Cayce has a very different slant on Saturn, which I try to incorporate as compared with the classic kind of old man time, restrictions, duty, hard work, being objective, pragmatic, and so forth, which I believe all of that is true about Saturn. But then Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, the psychic, talked about the dimensions of the planet, that our souls, when we die, and of course I am, as a spiritual hypnotherapist, aiding people to take a look at their past lives and life between lives, very interested in where do we as souls go. And Edgar Cayce says we can go to the dimension called Saturn, which is one dimension, which is sort of flat, which is limited, and it represents when we as individuals with the power of free will, when we get off track, by having our will or our way too often, then we can lose our way, and then we are sometimes sent back into Saturn to reboot, to restart, which I found very interesting, and kind of like, how does that fit in with the interpretation of Saturn? But we'll see as we go. Classically, Saturn represents the classic duty, responsibilities. I'm going to be reading some of this, even though you can read it yourself for the audio version. Responsibilities, discipline, change, and that's what Edgar Cayce talked about, change, which many times a classic astrological interpretation of Saturn would not really quickly talk about change. But when you think about a Saturn return or a strong aspect to Saturn, and then you go, it's time to get onto a new program, project, job, etc. And that is indeed change. There are challenges and opportunities with that. Classically, as it is the ruler of Capricorn, it's connected with the government, law, bureaucracy, office, structure, capitalism in many different ways, business, which is going to be the dynamic when it comes up against idealistic Neptune. Oftentimes, people associated with Saturn are the established people, the elders, authorities, and those in power, officials, bureaucrats, classic father figures, conservatives also associated with that, and bureaucrats, bosses, economists, bankers, reactionaries, oftentimes. So we're introducing the characters in the cosmic play. Then we have Neptune. Now we're talking about a very different subject, a very different energy. Neptune, the mystic dreamer, the idealist, the empath, sensitive, caring, the rules. Pisces, the fish. Neptune, of course, the god of the sea, and those areas connected to islands, shores, beaches, and things of that nature, but also liquids and solutions of various sorts. I think of Neptune as a higher octave of Venus, and thus it's another muse, and with that aesthetic sense as Venus has, Neptune would be inspiring for music, compositions, art, visuals, and photography kind of fits into that. So it's a very different energy, you know, as compared with Saturn. And so it's really excellent when they come together and work together if they can. Other things associated with Neptune. Mysticism, intuition, dreams, vision quests, idealism, sometimes escapism, and escapism can come in various different ways, whether that be someone who goes off and meditates in some cave or takes off to a bar or into a disco or something like that and escapes in directions like that. Religion can also be an escape, but also faith and inspiration. On a higher vibration, it represents unconditional love. But sometimes that could be giving so much that it may turn into codependence. Places besides beaches could be ashrams and retreat centers, convents, cloisters, monasteries. One has to be careful about deception, illusion, and we will see historically that sometimes when Neptune aligns together with Saturn and Saturn says it is time to get on with a particular program, project, vision quest, and so forth, that Neptune might say, well, let's go off in this direction, which could be quite a ride. Healers, clergy, mystics, some con artists, and the deluded are sometimes associated with Neptune. Social workers, hippies, idealists. I think we have a couple of gathered here this evening. I certainly can see one in the mirror. Spiritualists, artists, musicians, animal lovers, martyrs, victims, and drifters. I mean, wow, movie stars and theatrical people, especially when you add celluloid or images or movies or the visual arts. Now, the present situation, what's going on here? And that is a Saturn question at first. It seems like a Saturnian question, the present situation. But could it be a Neptunian possibility? One can take the same theme and go into very different places and phases as well as notions, because these two planets can share power and ideals. but oftentimes it's a matter of, the balancing act. And just to have a visualization here, that higher octave of Venus, which rules Libra, which is the scales. And imagine here the Saturn on one side, Neptune on the other side, and the scales can tip one way or the other. And at some points, Saturn may be the stronger in a configuration with a particular individual or group or a time and place. And then at other times, Neptune may have the upper hand, and that's going to change the dynamics. But it's really interesting how they all work and play, and sometimes come into a tug of war or a tension, or they're just not on the same page. That happens in history, and we'll take a look at historical alignments with these two. Yes, history will tell the tale. And so we take a trip down memory lane. Going back, if anybody can remember it, we're talking about past lives, of course, to 1846 and 1845, 1847, around there. When I take a look at these alignments, I take a look at the year before, the year after, because the energy, of course, is growing there. In taking a look at this memory reminiscence, Saturn, of course, likes history and dates, actions, programs, and things like that. But when Neptune looks at history, it will sense the intentions and the sometimes messy and blurry outcomes. Very intuitive, sense-oriented, but let's start at the beginning in our modern era. And that here is the discovery of Neptune. And I believe that you can see this. I hope you can. 1846 it was September 23rd, and the sun had just gone into Libra, and there we have again the scales. And I think that there's no mistake about when certain things happen. And one of the things that really pops out with this discovery of Neptune is the alignment there in the ninth house, because this was in Berlin, Germany. And Neptune right there in the same degree, less than 1 degree apart from Saturn in the sign of Aquarius. And I had mentioned that at the beginning, how I believe that might be an indicator in this time, in this age of Aquarius, that we're probably supposed to really pay attention to these two, how they interact, and if we can find a good balance act between these two, because they can, the possibility is there that they can get it right, that they can work together. But as we know in history, sometimes there's really been some messes. There has been some really difficult things that happen with these two. Another thing that I find interesting here is that at that point, the planet Uranus was there in the 10th house, 12 degrees, squaring the rising sign of Cancer. And so there's this sense, again, I believe, of the Aquarian age, and that astrological, innovative, progressive sorts of things may have something to do also. Remember, this is the discovery of Neptune, but this is also the alignments of Neptune and Saturn in their phases, as I said, every 34, 36 years, and having opportunities to revisit some themes. And Uranus is there giving us modern technology in the innovative sign of Aries. And here we are on Zoom in many different states around the United States at this point, looking at astrological alignments. It's very Uranian. Okay, 1846, when it all began. Saturn was right there, as I say, less than a degree next to Neptune. And I sense that, the heavy and taciturn Saturn, Father Time, has a few words for the vague and fluffy idealism of Neptune. Saturn is striving for productivity and accomplishment, while sympathetic Neptune wants to care for the down and out, the marginalized, the misunderstood. And we will indeed see that in history whenever these two get together. Coincidentally, other things we're having, and I point towards artists, poets, visionaries, musicians, and so forth, and that one can really focus just upon that as whenever they get together. But I start this off here with a classic, the Raven, because we're talking also about Saturn is involved with this too. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." I believe that Edgar Allan Poe was a Capricorn, and he had a bit of a heavy side to him that would fit in quite nicely with the Saturn Neptune that could get kind of heavy at times. Melancholy. One of the first things that I'd like to start here, however, was in the very, very beginning of 1845. And now we're looking at, indeed, Father Time on an island country. And so it was in January 1st of 1845. The Philippines hopped over the international date line that had been established there not that, earlier for the purpose of aiding shipment of goods, and so that everybody's on the right time or on the same time. But for a while, prior to 1845, the Philippines was on the other side of the international date line. And so it changed that date line, as nations can, make decisions to do that, so that they could align more with the other Asian countries, again, for trade and to get things done. Now, isn't that a classic kind of thing for trade, for business? Saturn would really approve. Island country, Neptune, of course, and time will be a dynamic from that we'll see here. Then we start with the basic theme that I had come up with already, and that is the communist alignment, or one can say even like a socialist or an idealistic coupling of the planets that want to empathize and aid the common person. Well, in 1845, Friedrich Engels wrote his treatise, The Condition of the Working Class in England. And he had corresponded with Karl Marx, who was also in Germany around that same time. But Karl Marx was a bad boy already. And he had offended the royalty there in Berlin and the Prussian king. And several of his publications had been either banned, or he was asked to leave, or please don't print anymore. And so then he went off to Brussels and Belgium. There he met Engels, and then they collaborated. At one point, they traveled to England. They shared ideas with other radicals. And then this starts the show. They published the Communist Manifesto. And there's a specter lying over Europe, and that is that change is needed. So here we have a chart of Karl Marx, and he's got quite an interesting chart here too, recognizing that he really started to come into his own when he was writing. He studied philosophy, by the way, in German universities, and was very interested in Hegel, and Hegel had a large perspective on time, and that nations come together and there is a sense of time and purpose and a development over a period of time. And that kind of grabbed Karl Marx in his younger years. But then later on he says, well, actually, it's the economy, stupid. And it was an economic reason why people come together, for their common good. And that's where one needs to focus. But of course, he's a double Taurus with the North Node there in Taurus, which would represent then automatically that he must have been very close to an eclipse right there. And that one could say says a lot about him too. But I also find interesting up there, you see in his 10th house, we've got the idealistic Uranus up there next to Neptune. And this is a very interesting visionary perspective. They, as an aligning duo, they come together approximately every 170 years. And so basically, he was born in 1818, but they certainly in the early 1820s, they had that exact conjunction. And there were many nations that can claim their political independence back to when these two got together. Interestingly enough, this is also when Mary Shelley was writing, and she wrote her Frankenstein at that point. And even though it's turned into a bit of a horror picture, just for fun, just for entertainment's sake, her point was that what are the limits of humankind's scientific innovations, and where do we draw the line in how we interfere with nature? But as far as Karl Marx is concerned, it's right here in his 10th house of higher ideals, his basic contribution, one could say, to society. And one can say, for good or not. And certainly in the communist world, he was a hero. I remember when I visited East Germany back in the 1980s, that was really quite an eye-opener right there. And I went into a bookstore to find out, what are they reading? And so I went over to the socialist perspective, of course, and there were books by Karl Marx and Engels and Marxist-Leninist ideas. Then in the politics section, there were his books again. And then in the philosophy section, there were his books again over there. And then the social development anthropology, there were his books again over there. I go, okay, he has got that wrapped up. But we know how that story went. Karl Marx also shows up here in this first house. He's got his Saturn Pluto, and even though it's 10 degrees away, that says a lot about him too, and his own personal development. He had some money from his father, from his family, and did okay for a while, but then he gave it away for his various causes and publications and so forth. And then he had problems financially later, but it's back to focusing upon money anyway, das Kapital. What's the foundation of society and how can we change things? And it really does need to be changed, financially. But let's take a look at other things happening in 1845, 1846. If any of you have ever been to Bavaria, you may have come across those really fascinating castles that King Ludwig II of Bavaria, he was, the fairy king, the fairy tale king, and he was born, as you see there in August 25th, 1845. And I wanted to I didn't start off with this because I knew, of course, about the alignments with communist ideas with this particular alignment. But the more studies that I have done, the more that I found that kingships, royalty, and monarchies are also connected to this particular alignment. And I'm thinking, well, how does that kind of fit in with the kind of the classic idea of socialism or communism, when you gather the tools of production and money and the economy itself, and then give it basically or have it focused upon the common people. Whereas, of course, in a monarchy, it's the opposite. They take the money and from taxes and so forth for their own good. But when you look at it a little bit closer and with a particular suspicious eye, then one can gather the taxes, and then it goes towards the royal family and their neighbors and so forth. And so it's a reallocation of funds for a particular group of people who aren't really working for money, but they get the money to have their lifestyle. And so that's an interesting slant on things. But in the research that I have done, many important royal figures came to power whenever these two planets aligned. If anybody has any questions, as we go along, on my end, I can't really see anybody, and I can't tell if you have questions because I'm not seeing the screen. But if you do, just feel free to jump in there and ask a question or make a statement or something. Okay. Still, back in 1845, what was happening in the United States? But we were wanting to annex Texas. And that was how this particular alignment was being, let's say, focused upon. And again, very much like monarchies, you have to reassess what it is that these two planets might inspire. And what they inspired in the mid-1840s was this idea of manifest destiny. Now, the destiny thing, that's Neptune. And the manifest, that's Saturn. And it's this belief system, and now we're talking about belief systems, and that's very Neptunian, about it is the fate usually of the white man, of the Europeans, to conquer this North America. And the destiny was to go from the East Coast all the way over across, to the West Coast. And it started off, really quickly here with taking over Texas, which had been a part of Mexico for, I don't know, for how long, maybe 100 years or so. Yeah. And the Mexican government invited foreigners to come because the land was large and they needed settlers. So the Americans and even the colonists, before that point, they went over there. But then they said very quickly, well, English is our language, and it's not this Spanish thing. And so, as we all know, then some machinations were instigated, which is again kind of like, Saturn and Neptune again, sleight of hand, focus upon annexation, and here we have the manifest destiny right there. And within a year, they were wanting to annex California. So it went right across the way. The interesting thing that I have noticed is that history comes back to bite us again in some of these very same places in which there were some issues in the past are also issues again today. And so we've got, of course, the border problem right there south of Texas and along the border all the way over to, southwest towards California. And those Mexicans or those Southerners are coming through our border. Many people, of course, forgetting to the fact that it used to belong to them, but then it was taken over Also, as a contrast, also in May of 1845, Frederick Douglass, The Narrative of a Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, written by himself by the Boston Anti-Slavery Society. And that was an issue. That was a dynamic, of course, also in the 1840s. The other side of the Manifest Destiny, of course, was taking over Native American lands. And of course, the growth, the productive growth of this great land of ours was done by slavery. And slavery was a big issue at that point. And we'll see that those two planets again came together during the Civil War. No big surprise about that. And again, the contrast with this idea, kind of like this Neptunian sense of the downtrodden, and oftentimes that's going to be found with slaves, with serfs in Russia, as well as with indigenous people, basically the down and outs. And even though we're talking about probably larger than 50% of the majority would be women, but Neptune and how Saturn comes in with Neptune, aiding Neptune, women's issues and helping them who were a downtrodden class, and for probably billions of women yet today in our so-called modern world, that they're second-class citizens yet again. So this slavery shows up in many different ways. 1845, 1846. In May 23rd, the New York City Police Department is formed. And I have a question connected to that. Is that a communist idea? And you have to bear with me just for a minute, because you would probably imagine that lots of police would be really against communism, socialism, and so forth. But take a look again at the allocation of money, taxes on the populace going towards a particular group. And in a classic socialist communist idea, that collective money, power, productivity goes towards everybody. But in some systems, like our capitalist system over here, the money is collected again and it goes towards a group of people. And in this case, the New York City Police Department. That, as well as the militia, as well as the Army, the Navy, and the Marines, they are all kind of communist organizations because they don't have to make a profit. That's not why they exist. They're there to defend. They're there as a subsection of needs in a society. And so even though they would be gnashing at their teeth thinking about this, but it's kind of like a subgroup, a communist group. And my father was in the Air Force. I was in the Army myself. I'm a veteran. And so I know how that works from the inside. And yeah, things can be taken care of when you're a part of the system. And one can have meals taken care of, places to stay, job security. I mean, that's what everybody would like in a communist idea, but it is found within these military installations. How about that? I bring up something else very interesting as another aspect of the Neptunian solutions, mysterious ointments, endocrinology, virology, bacteriology, and so forth. September of 1845, the potato blight breaks out in Ireland, beginning the Great Famine that really, I believe that there was a great exodus of Irish, and they went to many different lands, but specifically, a lot of them came to the United States in the 1840s, 1850s, because they relied on, like one classic crop, which is always a problem. One should always diversify. Where's a good farmer having practical sense when you need them. But Yeah, the potato blight was a disease connected to plants, to potatoes, and there was a famine going on, and they had to leave. It was another thing that the Irish suffered. Besides, and we'll see that from time to time whenever these two planets get together, that the Irish are going to be fighting the British, and they did not want to be, under their thumb, but they had been for hundreds of years. And when that happens, whether that be, with the Irish and the British, or with the British and various other nations that they conquered around the world, as well as with the Americans, with the Native Americans, with the blacks, with the slaves and so forth, the haves, the have-nots, the oppressed and so forth. Classically, these two planets to get together and say, we got to do something to combat that. This is not good. But the interesting thing that will show up again from time to time is that there may be a bacteria, there may be a solution, sometimes an innovation, a drug that is going to help to eradicate some sort of disease when these two planets get together. The other thing, here's anesthesia was used for childbirth for the first time back in the very end of that particular year. And again, talk about anesthesia, that is Neptune land right there. You take a good whiff and start dreaming off, having a good time, smiling, not feeling any pain. So all of that is perfect. But it was for childbirth too. It was for health. It was medicinal purposes. What I also noticed when I was taking a look at these different dates, 1845, 1846, that there were 6 future naval admirals born the next year, and I think in 46 was another 4 naval admirals. But I came to the conclusion that I really couldn't say, oh, well, this is an indicator, of naval leaders. I mean, probably it certainly makes sense because Saturn is pragmatic and wanting to get focused and wanting to have a position of leadership. Neptune, of the seas, so it really does make sense. But to be fair, I would have to do a analytical statistical study of all the different years and find out, well, are more admirals born during the Saturn Neptune alignments, and I didn't have time to do that, so forget about it. It's just an interesting thing I just noticed at first. I already had mentioned Texas and the war with Mexico. That was happening during the 1840s. Here's another dynamic, and religions, faith, whether that be from the Catholics or millennial visionaries, people who had belief systems connected to their ideals of God and spirit and so forth. Again, very Neptunian. But then Saturn is in the mix, and the particular faith or the group has to make a decision. They have to say, we have to do something. And so the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, started by Joseph Smith, they were being persecuted, and partly the other Christians didn't believe, number one, the story of Joseph Smith, that he was visited by an angel, and so it's like Jesus and the tribes came to the Americas, so that was a little bit too much for some of them. But then, of course, the whole thing connected with polygamy was an issue, and that was seen as a crime to a lot of so-called, virtuous Christians at the time. So they were having a rough time, and they were kicked out from place to place. So they were heading west. They were on the way during the 1840s. In the meantime, over in India, there was the Anglo-Sikh War, and the British forces were, defeated the Sikhs at that point. But again, it was back to colonialism, And here was a belief system, a faith, and whether they be a cultural group or a religious cultural group, it is a minority at the mercy of a Saturnian group, a conquering group, and of course, imperialism was a big deal for hundreds of years. In the meantime, there was a Galatian slaughter in Austria, and this was in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was a peasant revolt. And when I think of peasants or serfs or blacks or slaves, I mean, again, this is the downtrodden, and then they have enough, and they say enough is enough, and then they revolt. So we find lots of examples of that whenever these two planets get together. You see that again in Portugal. And here we have, of course, the classic dynamic that the people have had enough of it, and then they start to revolt. And then the royalists or the military or the soldiers come in and put a stop to it. It's just a classic ring around the rosy right there. I also point out here that in June of that year, there was Pope Pius IX. He came in, and his reign was for 31 and a half years, which is the longest one so far. But I point out here that, again, religions like the Catholic Church are inspired by Neptune, which was the ruler, of course, of Pisces, of the Piscean age, and the institutions of religion. So these are religions that are really quite large and established as compared with the Mormons, who were starting out at that point, still small, being able to be picked on. But, we'll see that, of course, the larger religions, they will do their own picking. (1846), Texas, the annexation of the Republic of Texas. It was finalized. And this I find interesting because we're, of course, looking at symbols and synchronicities and so forth. After it was finalized, the newly formed Texas state government officially installed in Austin 3 days later, February 22nd, 1846, the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia is cracked while being rung for George Washington's birthday. What might this say about manifest destiny? Those who have ears may listen. Those who have eyes may see. But we know, all of us here as soothsayers, as readers, interested in metaphysics and spirituality, to us, it's like, oh, no coincidence there. But to a lot of people who are saying, "No, that's nonsense," they weren't paying attention, so they didn't get it. I'm not sure if you can see the bottom of this image of Susan B. Anthony, 1872. Do you see the 1872? But that was another alignment. And again, women's rights. Women's rights was definitely a big deal, a big issue throughout the time. And so again, when the planets went to an opposition, I believe in 1872, she was running for office. In fact, I think she wasn't running for office. She illegally voted. And I think she had to go to jail for a little bit and had a fine. But again, the suffragettes, women's movements, either born on one of these alignments or they really did a lot of work and protests. Now, on one level, it was, of course, for their freedom to vote, to be involved in the process themselves. And in that sense, again, Neptune as the higher octave of Venus, representing women, but again, as the downtrodden or as those who are disenfranchised, those who are set aside, put aside. Saturn comes in to help them, and then they organize. And then they say, well, we have to stop this. We have to move forward. We have to be able to have our rights understood. All that's connected classically. Another thing that when the women got together, they were looking at another dynamic connected with Neptune, and I've already mentioned drugs, also beer, wine, liquor, and so forth. And so the temperance movement came along, mostly inspired, let's say, frustrated, through women because of their alcoholic men who were spending all the money for the family, and they focused in upon, alcohol, drugs is the great evil, and they're going to fight the evil. And so the temperance movements are again aligned with these two planets coming together, where Neptune represents, drugs and alcohol and so forth, and Saturn says, no, stop it. And as we know, that ended up more towards the another alignment, another cycle after Susan B. Anthony, and that was in 1917, 1918, 1919, when the women got the vote, but then also that was the beginning of the prohibition. And that was an experiment that did not work very well. So, but again, classically, we can see that we can see the ideas behind them, the intentions behind them, but it didn't work. Before we go to 1918, although that was a very important, that was a very powerful time. Can you did I lose that? Okay, let me get back to this here. And I've got to get back here. Now I'm able to see some of the questions and comments here. Thank you, Shelley. Oh yeah, also the interesting. Yes, and of course then the conjunctions coming up. So the big conjunctions here was 1846 that we were taking a look at. Then came 1882, and this was when Karl Marx died in 1883, but it was the alignment of larger social movements and communist collectives coming together to sort out their grievances. So that's, another one. I'll quickly go through them again. 1917, what an interesting coincidence that is. 1917, that was, of course, the Bolshevik Revolution. And I'm right on cue right there. And again, another phase, another wave goes on, and maybe some people in this group might have been born during 1952, 1953, when again those planets came together. And the interesting thing about that, I've already mentioned, 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, that is so like communist. Lenin, came from exile, came to Russia. By the way, throughout many of these times, there was still a lot of attacks on Native Americans, and even in the 1872 time, with that thing with Susan B. Anthony and the women's movements, again attacking the Native Americans, and a lot of sad sorts of things there. 1953. Again, this is when, by the way, back to the royalty, that Elizabeth came to power as the Queen Elizabeth. And it was also when Stalin died, and that was so big in the Soviet Empire that his reign, and one can again go back with some of the squares and oppositions to Saturn and Pluto, Saturn and Neptune, and his attacks on his own people, getting rid of the enemy, and forced marches and gulags and so forth. A terrible person, but he died at that point. And then very soon Khrushchev was going to be the premier there. What I also find interesting was that Gorbachev, who was a young man studying law at that point, he joined the Communist Party that year. And we know where he went and how influential he was. But I also would like to point out that Vladimir Putin was born at that point. What an interesting alignment that is right there. The next time that they came around was in 1989, and what a time that was. My goodness. That was, of course, the fall of the Eastern blocs, the Berlin Wall, the dissolution of the whole Eastern countries there, and then the crumbling of the Soviet Union that didn't last, 1990. Just right after that. There were some other planets that were helping with this, but it's just right on time with the communist alignment and then the dissolution of the whole Soviet Union, and like a failed experiment. Since then, of course, we have the squares, trines, oppositions, and so forth. But the next one coming up here is the 2025. I'm going to go back to the screen share. Any questions so far? Okay, we are back here because we got booted out. I'll blame that on Saturn. Booted out. Karl Marx, contrast. The Hobbit and J.R.R. Tolkien's famous stories, and he, by the way, was a soldier in World War I, and he, as a young man, he really experienced the alignment there of the Neptune, Saturn, but his Neptune, of course, imaginative and creative and taking you to another world. But he had a couple of things to say about politics, and this is, fitting in to the idea of anarchy without a ruler. We are free agents. And he says here, my political opinions lean more and more to anarchy. The most improper job of any man, even saints, is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity. Very wise. And again, his publications came out with these alignments, and the world is a better place for that. FDR, I had mentioned before that they came together in a conjunction in 1882, and I believe that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born in either 1882. Yes, I think he was born in 1882 with that conjunction. And of course, then besides having polio, and so here's the crippling aspect that comes up from time to time with innovations, with new products, with help from medicine, but as well as dealing with the poor, the downtrodden, the people who cannot walk. And of course, FDR was lame; he could not walk. He had suffered from polio. So there that was. But those two planets came together in an aspect here in 1935, 1936, when, of course, he was the president, and he made many different innovations. At that point, there was the suffering from the drought in the United States, and then from Oklahoma, as well as many states going west, and people going without things because of, they were still suffering from the Great Depression, which is one of the things that Franklin came in to aid here. But here he has this really interesting quote, and he had some other very important things to say. We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace: business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, war profiteering. They had begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. We know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. And FDR, of course, was so popular that he won an unprecedented 4 terms. And he, as a Republican, Democrat, the Republicans could not beat him in a fair and square election. So once he was, out, once they had the power to do that, they said, well, this will never happen again. And we have term limits, and you can only be, president only 2 times. We're not going to have this Roosevelt thing happening again. So if you can't lick them, then change the law. So that was another interesting dynamic there connected to FDR. I had mentioned already 1989. What a time that was, because again, the 2 planets come together, and a big time for communism again, because the whole Soviet Union is having an earthquake. Look at this particular alignment over here, and you'll see in the 5th house, because now this was set for the fall of the Berlin Wall. That was November 9th, 1989. And at that point, there was already groups, riots, rebelliousness from Czechoslovakia, Hungary, East Germany. People had basically had enough of the Soviet control, and of course, that's when the Berlin Wall fell. Here again, we have that alignment. You see in the 5th house, Saturn in Capricorn, conjunct Neptune, and coming up also in Capricorn, you see the planet Uranus, almost 3 degrees Capricorn. So that's going to really, excite the whole mood there. 1989, 1990, 1991, when Uranus was slowly moving up towards a conjunction with Neptune in 92, 93, 94. And remember, it was that same conjunction of Uranus-Neptune in which we had Karl Marx born, as well as many of those nations, especially in South America. They gained their freedom, their independence during the 1820s. And 170 years later, they come together in the 1990s. And by the way, you get also the technologically inclined planet Uranus connected with the visually inspired Neptune, and we had the World Wide Web there in the 1990s, and the world is quite better for that. But in the meantime, back to 1989, right there, here, the fall of the Berlin Wall, we see Saturn right next to Neptune. So many things were going on. Poland getting together with Lech Walesa and the Polish protests right there. And basically, a lot of the Soviet republics, like East Germany and Poland and Hungary and so forth, they were just losing it. They were losing respect, and the people had had enough. And it was a time again for a reaction. So in this sense, we can't say, oh, this is pro-communist, but this was the fall of communism, but it's still communist. You know, it was like something really big happened there, you know, at that point. One other interesting thing about this, by the way, is that same alignment of Saturn Neptune. You see opposite that over there in the 11th house is Jupiter at also 10 degrees. So it's pretty exact. And so Jupiter was like quite excited, jubilant over finally of course, the Berlin Wall itself, but all of East Germany was like a big prison. As I said, I had visited there myself. And yeah, turning a country into, you know, you shall not leave and you will be controlled. And it was really quite a terrible experiment, we'll call that. But Jupiter, ebullient, positive, excited, and it was time to break out of that. And so it was really quite a very exciting time for people. One other interesting thing you'll see there in the nadir or the IC is Pluto right there, revolutionary, and it was, the whole thing was just going to fall apart right there. They had enough. So a classic good revolutionary alignment. In the meantime, the Baltic states, I'm not sure if anybody here has been over there to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I spent a little time in Estonia myself, and they had over there the singing revolution. And what a nice, peaceful way to break away. But we're back to the higher octave of Venus, Neptune, singing, music, coming together in peace. And so spontaneously in Estonia, at this point, 1988, 1989, the singing revolution is still referred to today, where it started with women, I believe, that they, again, just had enough, but what they may not have known unless they were astrologically inclined, but it was just the perfect time for yet another revolution. But they got together in solidarity and said, you know, we're not going to play the game anymore, and we're going to sing about it. But that reminds me, actually, going with the Estonian people, they've got a very unique language, somewhat related to Finnish, but going back to about the year 1000, when they came across, you know, other Westerners, Europeans who ultimately controlled them. So they basically have lost their autonomy for like 700 years. So they knew what oppression was. We had that Neptunian side of it. But interesting, funny story was that when the Christians came around the year 1000 to Estonia, they went to this island, and with, of course, their Bibles, but also with their swords. And they say, you all will convert. You will all become Christians. They were by a pond or a river, I believe. And they, you know, the Estonian tribe there were forced to be converted. And they, you know, went into the water and they were baptized. And then they were all basically Christians. And then the marauding, you know, Christian soldiers then left that area, left that island, and the local townspeople, the Estonians there, you know, they said, well, we were forced to do this. So they go back into the pond, they go back into the water, and they washed it off. It's just a classic story that they had we're quite proud of today. This particular image here was when the three Baltic states got together arm in arm on a 600-kilometer length of those three different nations, the people in solidarity, hand in hand, arm in arm, a solid link of people creating this line or this wall of solidarity, saying, we are no longer part of the Soviet Union. We are no longer going to be, communists with you. We declare our independence. And again, in a very peaceful manner. There were other nations, not only in Europe at the time, but in other countries, that they too wanted to have their independence, but oftentimes the imperialist regime or the conquering nation or the monarchy or something would really violently, attack them. And that is also a part of history many times, oftentimes with these two planets getting together. There were many other different things, but let me say also this with we know that FDR was a part of this. Yeah, that doesn't help. Okay, so FDR had his various New Deal programs, again during these alignments of the planets, and one of them was his second Bill of Rights, and that is worth reading again. I'm going to temporarily get out of this and then come over here to this very important Bill of Rights. Oh, by the way, as I'm looking at some of these different notes, some really fun things show up here too. When you're thinking of the visuals of Neptune, and then let's get it out there. Walt Disney in 1937, when we had again that alignment that I'm talking about with FDR, he brought out Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it was the world's first feature-length animated film, and it was a huge success and a great story and still a delight today. There was also in 37, remember this was again when the fascism was really growing, and Mussolini and Hitler were on the rise, gaining power and so forth. And in Germany, there was a conscientious objector, a Lutheran pastor by the name of Martin Niemöller. And he later on, although he was arrested, here in 37, he published his poem in 1946. But it's really very appropriate to these two planets and the whole idea connected to, when will you stand up? So his poem is, First they came. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Certainly the whole classic ideals there. The ideals of FDR in his second Bill of Rights was talking basically about economic security. And everyone would have to have the basics applied to them. And even though he was a democratic socialist, he was working towards the New Deal. One would really never say that he was a communist, but his ideals was that until society has a guaranteed income, as it were, or security for health, for work, for family, to have a home. Until those things are really guaranteed by society, we will not progress as a people. So very, very wise there. We have this really great image. I believe that you can see it, because we're talking about, what may be happening here in 2026 coming up. We'll be feeling it a bit in 2025 because I see that it's, kind of a 3-year phase, 25, 26, 27, but definitely the alignment is 2026. Got this great image here. The beginning is near here. We find this idealist on this shaky ladder coming up and looking over a kind of a gray, ugly wall, and there is the cosmos. And specifically, we've got Saturn and probably Neptune over there to be seen. And so the various ideas, and let me just make a list here. One of the things that I had found looking at many different times was that there would be periodically some mishaps or ships sinking, and that would make sense in one way, because Neptune, again, of the seas, of the oceans, and Saturn's like coming up against something that you didn't expect. And so again, I can't say very much like how many admirals are born during an alignment like this. They have to do a really good statistical study to find out truly. But I did see it a lot, that there were naval, shipping, ocean accidents, and ships sinking most times, many times during these alignments. And so I kind of expecting the same thing happening there too. What we have seen is that any nation, and again, this is looking in the past, in which there is an oppressed group, that the people are unhappy, that they have had enough, they are going to be ripe during this alignment to have an uprising. And so we can make some educated guesses right now that over in Russia, which again oftentimes was a midpoint of these socialist and communist things, that they're going to be in trouble. And I think even though it's a dictatorship as it is right now, it was a dictatorship. It was by the czars and the royal family in the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. So I think that would be one nation I would be looking at. And then we have China, another communist nation. The funny thing about that communist nation is that it's one of the best capitalists in town. So they have done really quite well with money and finances. In 1989, 1990, in the Tiananmen Square, the Chinese were again, starting with the students, wanting to have a revolution, wanting to like have enough of the communist system. But as compared with Europe, in which they were, the protesters were successful, the protesters were not successful in China, even though it happened at the same time, even though it was a Saturn Neptune conjunction in 1989. They got together, but there was a pretty vicious, put down of their calls for freedom and change. But I think that may be changing, especially when we have more and more Chinese who are saying, well, we're almost, we can compete, we can travel, why not have other things that the Western nations have? So I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some protests and some changes and some demands over there in China. And then, of course, North Korea, wow, again, the Korean War was happening during that alignment in the early 1950s. And so, again, they're very much, connected with a failed communist system. So all of that is definitely there as slim pickings. Some of the countries in South America, Central America, African countries, many of them, again, unhappy people, dictatorships, people have had enough. So I believe that we're going to have like widespread social changes and the fall of many different countries, or the reformation of government systems at that point. I'm a little bit worried here about in the United States because, wow, it's really shaky. And the fascist groups that were, again, quite strong, also when these alignments came in, they're alive and not so well today in the United States. And that is when Saturn becomes stronger than Neptune. Or the Neptunian sense of my institution of religion will have its way through law, Saturn, and through governmental sanctions. So it has worked out that way too. All of these things are pointing towards, kind of shaky things going on here. And when I take a look at the border situation, again, we're talking about minorities. Again, back as to the Neptune people, the down and outs, the outsiders, the people who are lacking, people who are hungry, who are on the outside. They come up against the Saturn walls or blocks or militia. And so that's a tension point that it's probably going to erupt 25, 26, not too long from now. In the meantime, the idealists can have their own innovations. And if one could take more of a pragmatic social democratic approach as found in the Scandinavian countries, if such systems were adopted here, we could have more successful visions of this again in 2026. Many different nations coming in. I have found also that there have been some epidemics connected to these when they get together. And innovations in medicine and ways to heal those very same epidemics. But oftentimes Neptune is with unsanitary conditions or viruses, or again, invisible sorts of things, which are in viruses and bacteria. They're basically invisible to the eyeball. So there can be some outbreaks, very likely. A variation of maybe, I don't think it's going to be the same thing as the COVID thing, and it'll be something different. But in historically in the past, there have been these same alignments with them. So those are a few of the different things that I have found here coming up very soon in times where people, especially if they are unhappy, if they are on the other end of the power minority, typically, then there will be a pushback. And that can also be found in the law courts. And I have a feeling that, again, back to women's issues, that again shows up oftentimes with the Saturn Neptune alignment, that the abortion thing and women's rights, not only in the United States, but in other countries too, that's going to be, again, front and center. And then different religions, whether they be smaller religions or institutions of religions, they too will have some shifts. And that could include, like Iran, which, by the way, back in the early 50s with that other alignment, that conjunction, that's when the Shah of Iran was placed back there when the people had an election, a free and fair election, got rid of the Shah. And unfortunately, the United States helped to put him back into power because they felt like he was, more agreeable to our policies at the time. And that back, that was what's called in CIA was a great fiasco. And blowback is the term that they use when it is unforeseen circumstances of policy. And that certainly did happen there. Other places like Syria and some religiously controlled places, they may also be having some issues. I'm thinking also Afghanistan, maybe Pakistan, but very fragile in some sense, and a lot of unhappy people. So all of that is prime real estate for when these two get together relatively soon. In the meantime, you got to keep calm and carry on. One of the things that has shown up, and I started the talk talking about in the Philippines, with that first 1845 alignment, that they decided to do change their international date line. And so that again shows up from time to time when something, as an innovation, for instance, by having the time zones, that came up also with Father Time, Saturn, with Neptune. Can we have something so that we don't have chaos? And that has shown up here too. And so there's been some rumbling here lately about daylight savings time, and that may change here in 2026. And it was actually instigated or started again when these two planets in the past got together. So that's yet another thing. So stay tuned. Basically, that is going to help you to get an idea of what to expect. So that is my presentation in a nutshell, and I'm open for some questions if you have, or some solutions, some answers, some insights, because it's I know I've covered a lot of territory, a couple hundred years. But it is interesting that whenever these two come together, something really big happens historically, socially, politically.
Well, I personally want to salute you for all the research, all the travel you've done, and everything you put into this amazing demonstration tonight. I deal with people one at a time because I've always done that when I was in the medical field or doing my astrology and my other psychic work. And I just feel like I'm going to end up exactly where I need to be. But you opened my eyes to many things. Okay. And understand
and
what's
one of
going
them,
on.
perhaps, Aphrodite, that you were born with a Saturn Neptune alignment, right?
And you know, I'm within 3 minutes.
Wow.
They're that tight.
Wow.
But I also had Jupiter and Venus conjunct within 3 minutes.
Well,
And
that's
I think
cool.
they
Yeah.
form a double trine. Okay.
Okay, good.
So
Well,
I made it
if you
through.
don't mind me telling on you, she does express the high idealism of this Saturn Neptune. She adopts people, and she's very caring, and she's wanting to make sure that, you know, many people, especially those who are, you know, needing help, Aphrodite is going to be there. And
Yes.
I think she also take care of animals, cats and dogs too.
Oh, I
So
have 4 rescue cats right now, and I had to pause for a minute because I know I couldn't get the recording anyway, and take care of my babies. They're up here like, "What are you doing, mommy?"
right.
But again, to me, inside of me is an inner child and a great mother. So even in the medical field, when I was with a neonatal unit or the elderly in a rest home, and I would go there and I'd intercede, I thought all of them are God's children and they are all mine. And that's just how I roll. But this opened my eyes to some of the things that are going on in the world that I had no idea, honey. I mean, this blew me away tonight. A great presentation, absolutely spectacular. Thank you.
Thank you, Aphrodite.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or ideas or insights?
I saw that 3 of the dates you talked about also had Uranus involved with that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. In the discovery date, it was making a 1/8 or semi-square. In 52, it was making a square. And then in the 80s, it was conjunct, as you pointed out, loosely. I've often thought the 3 of those were responsible in producing large upheavals in society and
Yes,
historical moments.
I agree. Yep.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And that one, especially in 1989, 1990, was just so powerful. And it wasn't just, you know, Saturn, Neptune, you know, by themselves. They had some extra help, you know, cosmically speaking, but still it was right on cue with, you know, communist changes, social changes, protests from again, the downtrodden, the unhappy constituents, the people who felt oppressed. And I'm expecting that again, those countries, those places coming up very soon, 2026. You know, those people who are unhappy, feeling oppressed, you know, wanting to protest, it's going to happen at that point.
But the unique thing going on now is Pluto going back in Aquarius, the sign of the fellowship of man. Okay, a higher octave. As we know, yours is a higher octave of Mercury. And to me, yours is all about the Holy Spirit. And many different religions have a different dynamic, but there's something that is just in the knowing. And this hasn't happened after 248 years that we have it there. Yeah, it's going to slip back a little bit to Capricorn. It's going to go back, but it's a planet process, not event. So if we can get together as a fellowship of man, especially in this country, this is where we live, and promote that in whatever we do, however we do it, believe it, Neptune, Saturn, okay? Believe it, know we can manifest our dreams with enough faith and the kindness and consciousness that we were born to give to this world.
Indeed. Yep. Yep. Spoken like a good Saturn Neptune woman.
Yes, yes.
in
And
Libra.
when
Crazy me.
speak to
I
that,
know, crazy me.
I just want to speak to what you said, Aphrodite, because I agree with you.
Yes.
1000%.
Thank you, lady. You're
And
so
I
sweet.
think-
What's your name?
My name is Shelley, and I
Shelley,
just
I can
wanted
see it
to
now. Thank
I
you.
just want to continue and say that Uranus is also Aquarius's vision.
Mhm.
The energy of the vision is what's so important. And Saturn and Neptune and Pisces also signify fear.
Right.
And, you know, the manipulation is the greatest when you have
I won't
fear.
buy into it. I haven't even had a TV on for 6 years. No
Well,
thanks.
that's good, but the rest of the world is not
I
like
know.
you. And one of the things that, you know, when we look at these different things, like the crisis of the immigration that's trying to get into the United States, and I saw it tonight on the PBS NewsHour, they interviewed the guy who's in charge of all of that, and I can't remember names in the cabinet anymore, but it's the one they tried to impeach recently. And he was talking about that the United States is not the only place where this is taking place. People
Exactly.
are flooding out of countries to go somewhere else. And I mean, I remember when I moved up to South Carolina, I said to myself, you know, people are going to start wanting to move here to get away from the coastline, just like I wanted to get away from the coastline of South Florida, Southeast Florida. And why don't we find a way to expand to include? You know,
I
why don't we
agree.
find a way to create space for
Yes, ma'am.
people and to give them jobs to do that help us, that help
All
them?
immigrants.
Why do we have to view it always? And the United States has always viewed anything coming in after us.
Mhm.
Right, right, yeah.
After
We
my
got our
country
piece of
came
the
here,
pie.
now, oh, look, the Irish want to come, the Italians are coming, the Puerto Ricans, oh my God. You know, and
Wow.
it's always the fear of somebody taking what's mine. And that, I feel, the dissolution of the structures, the Saturn, Neptune, you know, it's like, oh God, it's all crumbling.
There's
So if
enough
we could
for
just
everyone.
keep the vision, the positive vision of the inclusion of the age of Aquarius, which I said in a comment to you, you're the only other person in the field of astrology that ever mentioned what to me was obvious. They discovered Uranus, we went into Aquarius, we had electricity, we had but people think that everything's going to change like that, and it never does. So when they sang the song, The Dawning of the Age of Aquarius, this is like we don't even see the crescent moon yet.
We
You
talked
know,
about in the 70s, and now
but we
Pluto
can
is finally
still-
there, though, and it took it a
Well, Pluto
long time to get there.
that's another thing though. Pluto just went into
Mhm.
Aquarius, and the action of Pluto is frequently not observed until after it has taken place. It's scorpionic, like rust that you didn't see in a
I
chair
agree.
or something,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
the chair is
Yep.
broken. So
Mhm.
we have to stop thinking that just because we're not, it didn't shift and it's not la 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 and everything's great now and people took the power. People aren't prepared yet to take the power. You know, we have to get over that fear base. We have to get into, oh, who said it? There's somebody famous who said this, and I can't think of who it is now, of course. Without the change of heart, there is no real revolution.
I agree.
First thing that has to change is the heart, what you feel
Yeah.
inside. So, you know, this is what what you said, Aphrodite, and what Stephen's trying to give us, and what I think astrology can give us is that ability to say, all right, there are so many different things you can say about anything, any planet within any sign. You know, there's always lots of different interpretations. Let's pick a
Yes.
good interpretation and hold the vision.
Yes.
You know,
Right,
like
right.
the more people who will hold the positive vision, we can make that happen then, but not if we fall down and say, oh, it didn't happen.
And
You know,
I don't want to
so-
listen to all the negative stuff on the news anymore. I don't do that anymore. I do look at it in the morning, And I know I don't have any control over it. So I watch it. I put my prayers out there because I know the
Well, that's the
invisible
thing.
can do what I cannot.
I mean, I think it's okay to know what's going on, but I
Yes.
think we have to use the power that we have, which we all have until they decide to put the chips in your brain, is that power to have your sacred vision become.
Yes, yes,
Absolutely.
indeed. You know, Shelley, this Pluto into Aquarius is the second time it's gone,
That's
you
right.
know, in the age of Aquarius.
Yep.
And we go back, you know, 240 some odd years. And when Uranus was discovered, it was the midpoint between the American and the French Revolution. And it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And boy, does that say a lot about, you know, Aquarius and the age of Aquarius. And yet Pluto, you know, what, you know, is in the same place that it was during the French Revolution. And there was some serious things going on there. And, you know, one of the things I look at with Aquarius, you always look for the polarity, you know, opposite of Aquarius is Leo.
Yeah.
And very soon, once we got into the age of Aquarius, and you know, equality, you know, fraternity, you know, and the rights of man and idealism and so forth, as espoused by the French Revolution. And then came Napoleon.
I was just talking about that. Who are you, Stephen? I'm gonna have to look at your chart. It's like, woo.
There we go. We're on this.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
they had an emperor.
But he made himself an emperor. He was, and
That's
Napoleon, Leo, is right in the middle of his name.
so that, and yes, that's interesting. And that's why the heart has to change.
Right, right.
It isn't just a fight. The fight is going to keep things fighting. So
Exactly, right, right. And that's,
I'll go back to
I think
sleep.
that's the ideal of what these two planets are striving to get across. You know, the idealism and sensitivity and caring of Neptune, but it's like, you know, keep your feet on the ground. You know, we have to, you know, organize things and make sure, you know, that it all works well. You know, because it's, you know, pie in the sky is sweet and nice, but it's just not gonna, you know, put bread on the table.
Well, Pluto's going to sneak back into Capricorn a little bit, go forward. It's going to be in that cusp for a couple of years. And I think what that means is the foundation of Capricorn, there's part of the foundation we want to keep, but we want to bring the best up in a progressive fashion. Okay. And so we're going to go back and forth with this. Now, technology right now has taken over. Now, I don't know if you have children and grandchildren, whatever, but all I know that right now, they don't even know how to do cursive anymore. Everything is going with artificial intelligence. Everything is going crazy right now with all the technology. And you have to upgrade every year or every two just to keep abreast of your situation to bring your gift to the world. Now, at my age, I'm doing my best. I'm 70 years old, and I am doing my best. And thank God, I have kids and grandkids and great grandkids that are going to help me. But it's ambitious. It is ambitious, but I'm in it to win it. I am in it to win it. I don't have any earth in my chart, as Stephen will tell you. So I believe what many people cannot. And I have made it through more miracles and tragedies in my life than most people I know. Wait till I write my book. Okay? Because I'm in it to win it. I'm in it to win it. And if there's any way I could help any place in the world, through my prayers, if that's all I have, there's a lot of power there. Please bless those. Help them when you can.